Okay, Bruchim Habayim, everybody. I want to talk about a subject that it's not so much connected to Parashat HaShavua, but it talks about some very interesting things. You know, on Tisha B'Av, we spoke about the situation in Israel and in America today with the unfortunate situation of anti-Semitism that exists. And there's a Sinat Yisrael that we're seeing now that we haven't been seeing for many years. And we talked about how you see in the Torah, if you look in the Sefer Dvarim, the rabbis, the Vilna Gaon specifically, was able to see almost prophetically that in this time in world history, there's going to be a phase of intense suffering for the Jewish people. And if you calculate, that corresponds to the times of what we called World War II and the Holocaust. And then immediately after that, we show that the next parasha, if we follow the timeline of what the Torah describes that will happen in the world history, we see that it also talks about immediately after that a movement of teshuvah. Which means that there will be a movement towards people coming to recognition of Hashem, of Yahadut. It's worthy of making mention of an amazing thing that's happening this Shabbat. I know some people in this Bet Knesset are going to be present to observe what will happen in the Shabbat project. But I want you to know, I think now they're estimating over 1 million people around the world. 1 million people around the world will be celebrating this Shabbat in every major city across the world that has a Jewish community has come together to celebrate what we call the Shabbat project. I know of two of them specifically. A friend of mine is behind a driving force behind the one that's going to take place in Los Angeles, in Netzach Synagogue. He sent me an email tonight. He said 1,000 people have signed up to be part of this Shabbat. Now what they're doing is not just coming and having people come for a Shabbat meal. What they're doing is trying to arrange that people will keep an entire Shabbat experience. These are people that have no background, no experience, and they're all coming together. So there's one, my brother-in-law is behind one that's taking place in Toronto. And he says over there they have literally hundreds of thousands of people. Tonight, as we speak, all across the world and across the United States, there are thousands and thousands of women that came together as part of the Shabbat project, and they're baking challah. Right now, I think there's 600 women in the JCC taking place right now, all together from everywhere. Background, zero background, Shomer Shabbat, not Shomer Shabbat, anything. And now they're all baking challah, and they're going to keep those chalot for Shabbat. And this is happening across the world. So you see, you could never believe something like this would happen. But for me, it's menuchat nefesh that I see that Baruch Hashem, in a world where we sometimes find so much darkness, that we do see a little bit of light. So I want to talk about specifically what is the role and the expectation that God has from us as we are reaching a time in history where there's a necessity for us to kind of look into our lives and change, not just individually, but as all of the Jewish people. And really, I think it's a two-part question that I want to deal with tonight. And we're going to go and break it down each one. So the first question is like this. And this, I believe, is a very serious question. If we believe that Hashem communicates to the world when He brings blessing and when He brings suffering, and God is somewhat expecting of us as people of the world, especially as Jews, to listen to His message, that He's telling us, hey, you know why I'm bringing this unfortunate circumstance? Because I want you to wake up and change. How many people are really going to listen to that message? I mean this question quite literally. You see, I think more than 90% of the Jewish people in the world today are completely uneducated in Torah and mitzvot. Many people don't even know Shema Yisrael. So when we think about Ba'acharit Yamim, near the end of time, Hashem is going to send messages into the world. And we could go through the signs. The Gemara says a list of signs that will be taking place in the times of before Moshiach. Very blatant. And you look in the world today, you see it's unbelievable how they're coming true. But what is the expectation of Hashem when majority of Jewish people in the world don't understand what they're hearing? They don't know a sign, let alone do they even believe that there is a sign. So the first question I have is, even if we come and we change and we want to grow and we want to make teshuvah, what difference does it make if the majority of Jewish people in the world are going to continue living their lives the way they do? And if Hashem expects Moshiach to come when the Jewish people change all of their ways, then I think we need to really understand what it is that what God is expecting from us as people. That's the first question. And the second part of this question is even if the responsibility falls on us, those who understand Torah and mitzvot, those who come out to a class on a Thursday night when there's other things to do, we who understand this message, does Hashem expect that we can influence the whole world? You see, we're a very small number. Jewish people, we make up less than 1% of the world population. You talk about Jews that are observant, that understand the Torah and mitzvot and the messages of God, you're talking even less than 1% of that percentage. It's a very, very small number. How do we, such a small number, influence hundreds times more of our size? There's a law in psychology, in social psychology and influence, is that the larger the mass will always influence the smaller group, right? Everybody always wants to know, well, what's in style? 3-button suits or 2-button suits? Who cares? No, what we do is we look at what the styles are. What are people wearing? And then we all of a sudden decide that this is good, right? Our wives' wardrobes would not be as big as they are if there wasn't movements constantly telling people what the new fashion is. We are always influenced by what people are doing around us. You know, there's a lot of examples to prove this one, but one of the most interesting examples, I could give a few of them. I may have mentioned this to you once. I thought it's an amazing idea. You know when they sell things on commercials at night, on television, infomercials, right? So they try to sell you like a knife from Japan, or I don't know, a toothpick that you can brush your teeth with. It's crazy things that they sell at night. What do they always say at the end of the message when they want to sell it to you? What do they say? They say, call now because operators are standing by, right? They say, call now in the next 5 minutes because operators are standing by. And this was the message for many years. But what they found is that the sales of products through infomercials at night was starting to decline very dramatically. And they didn't know what to do to be able to get sales up. So they hired a woman who was an expert marketing woman, and she said, you have it all wrong. Change the message at the end of the infomercial. Instead of saying, call now because operators are standing by, say this. Say, if you call and the phone is busy, please try again. So they looked at it and said, you crazy? These are lazy people sitting on their couch at 2 o'clock in the morning. You think even if he gets up the first time and he gets busy, you think he's going to get up and call again? You're going to scare everybody away. But they listened to her. She was a very respected person. They changed the message. All of a sudden they found, the sales started going up dramatically. And it was very clearly, an outcome of her idea. So they tried to understand what happened over here. And it's an amazing thing. Listen to this. When a person is sitting at home and they hear the statement, call now because operators are standing by, in your mind you think nobody's buying this product. Because if the operator's waiting for somebody to call, what you're telling the people who are buying this, don't bother calling. Because nobody else is either, because operators are waiting for people to call. She says you're giving the wrong message. Change it and say, if the phone is busy, call again. Then all of a sudden this guy's sitting in his couch and says, oh my gosh, everybody's buying this. Everybody is getting this knife or this blender or something, and immediately it forces people and it influences them to go pick up the telephone and make a purchase. You see from there an amazing thing is that we always want to do what everyone else around us is doing, even if we have no idea who they are. You never met that person who they're talking about who's calling in to buy the product. But if we find that a lot of people are doing, the research shows, if you want to influence somebody, you just need to show that 75% of a group of people are doing something, and you could almost rest assured that everyone else is going to follow. So there's a lot of proofs to this. I don't need to bore you through it. But if we believe that there's a fact that the influence will always be stronger with the majority, and the small is always going to be out pressured or disappear among the louder voice, how does Hashem expect us, who are such a small fraction of the world, who understand this message passionately enough to want to share, even if we scream from today to tomorrow, how do we influence the whole world around us? Is that a fair question? I want to tell you, by the way, the problems that we have, unfortunately, in the Jewish community in our day and age is not just an issue among the traditional Jewish community, not only in the Torah communities. If you go into a lot of the conservative and the Reform, they're having a very big problem keeping their communities together. People are becoming very apathetic to Judaism and Torah in every level. Even federations, the Jewish federations across America, they're in a very big crisis right now. What's the problem? The federations used to connect the Jewish people together by promoting Israel. Israel, 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 support Israel, be part of Israel, connect to Israel, right? And they used to get all the young people to join their efforts. What happened now? The young people don't care so much for Israel. Now all of a sudden they have no agenda to push. They have nothing to promote. There was a gathering that I was part of in Houston, and they actually had some of the people of the Federation, and they came to meet specifically in our community, the community of people that are Shomer Torah and Mitzvot, because they knew that as much as the other communities are all disappearing and becoming smaller in numbers, somehow the more a person is involved in Torah lifestyle, the community is not only not growing, it's flourishing. The young people are going to the Jewish schools. The people, the membership in the shuls are getting more. People are donating more, the more that religious they become. So they're wondering, what do they do that we don't do? There was a research study just finished recently, the Pew study. The Pew Research Center is one of the most sophisticated research institutions in the world. They run studies across the world on different trends that are taking place within society. And they did a study, they were contracted to do a study to find out what is the assimilation situation for Jewish people in America. Because no one had ever really done a comprehensive study. And it was a disaster what they found. They found on every level, I could go through the numbers, but you can find it online. They even have a summary of the study. But they found that the movement away from Judaism is so much worse than they imagined. And everybody is freaking out. Nobody knows what to do. The communities that are not as strong in Torah Mitzvah, the Reform and the conservative communities, unfortunately what's happening is now they're struggling because now they see the facts that if they continue in this path, statistically they're not going to exist anymore. So after the study came out, I was very curious, what is the response? What is the general Jewish community response to this situation of the Pew study? So I searched all over to try to find, voices of leadership, right? I know what in our circles, in the Torah circles, in the Torah communities, what the response is. But I wanted to hear what is the secular Jewish approach to this question, and it's amazing what I found. It's startling, but you can't make this up. There was a group of people. I forgot where I saw this. It was a discussion session that was taking place with some major Jewish leaders, secular leaders, and they were saying, let's propose some solutions to this problem of the Jews assimilating out. And guess what the most popular response that's being discussed now in those circles? Can anybody guess what it is? How are we going to solve this problem? So you know what they suggested? They suggested we need to become more lax in laws of conversion. They said what we need to do is drop some of the laws and let more people just become part of us. We don't need so much of the laws. It's very difficult. Person has to go through processes and there's study and real commitments that person has to make. They said, no, you know what? Let's make more people. If a person feels like they want to be culturally like that, let them in. This is the solution. Instead of saying, let's strengthen ourselves and find out what's working in the communities that are growing, the answer is let's loosen the laws of course, these are laws that are not based on Torah, but they're saying these are the solutions.
But didn't it happen in the past with the Ezra Sofer that he allowed conversion in the past?
We have very specific, in the halacha, we have very specific guidelines on how a person can become
no, but in the
considered.
Past, I don't remember which one in the history, in the Jewish history, that to say the Ezra Sofer, it was in the Ezra Sofer that he had mass conversion, just for this reason.
It could be, but according to what halacha dictates and what we follow today, that's not a solution. I'll tell you another answer that I found. This is amazing. There was an AIPAC convention. There was an AIPAC meeting, and one of the former presidents of AIPAC was at the gathering, and I approached him, and I asked him. I said, "Well, I know AIPAC is trying to promote Israel and the American support for the state of Israel, but I said, as we know, the younger generation are becoming a little less interested in Israel. You know, of course, we have the movement's birthright, and these things are at least fighting the trend, but the trend is much more heavily moving away. So I said, what's the solution? I said, don't you see that possibly there's, in more traditional Jewish lifestyle, that there's more movement towards Judaism, and maybe we should start looking and seeing what parallels can we find to start adapting in the larger culture. So he looks at me and he says, well, let me tell you what I heard. So he tells me of a very famous Jewish philanthropist, a person who gives a lot of charity. And he said he believes that the solution is going to be is that we need to build more Jewish pride. So how do we build Jewish pride? We have to start promoting Jewish heroes. Einstein, we have to promote him, people like him more. We have to find Jewish people that are celebrities and make them more vocal so people will say, he's Jewish, I wish I could stay Jewish also. It's interesting, but everyone is coming up with solutions that who knows if they're going to work. We're dealing with a situation which is so severe. We need to find an answer to this question of how are we going to keep the Jewish people together. First of all, what does Hashem expect if most people are ignorant to Torah and mitzvot? And second of all, if the responsibility is on us, how do we, a minority, influence the majority? So there's the two approaches. I'm sure there's many, but I'd like to suggest two that I've come across. The first is based on a Gemara in Sanhedrin. The Gemara in Sanhedrin on Kuf Yud Aleph Amud Aleph. And I'm going to read you the Gemara. The Gemara says like this: Tanya Rabbi Simai Omer, says Rabbi Simai, Ne'emar. It says by Yetziat Mitzrayim, when the Jews were leaving Mitzrayim, it says, Velakachti etchem li la'am. I took you out for me as a nation. V'ne'emar, and it says also, Veheveti etchem, I believe the end of the pasuk is la'aretz, and I brought you to the land of Israel. So you see the Torah is putting leaving Mitzrayim together with going into Israel. So we know that whenever two ideas are together in a pasuk, the Torah is teaching us a lesson that there's a connection between the two. Comes the Gemara and explains the connection. It says, Makish Tziyatan miMitzrayim leviyatan la'aretz. We're connecting the situation when the Jews left Egypt to the situation when the Jews went into Israel. And he says like this, unbelievable what the Gemara says. Ma biyatan la'aretz, shnaim misamech ribo, af yitziatan miMitzrayim shnaim misamech ribo. Saying like this, if you look, however many Jewish people left Egypt, how many of those Jews that left Egypt actually went into Eretz Yisrael? How many? 2 people. 2 people. Who? Caleb and Yeshua bin Nun. Says the Gemara, the connection is to show you that just like only 2 people from all of the people went into Israel, so too that's the amount of people that left Mitzrayim. Only 2 out of 600,000. Now, whatever that means, you have to understand the mathematics. But says the Meshech Chochmah, one of the great recent commentators, he says the following unbelievable idea. He says, think about what the Gemara is saying and what the Torah is saying. The miracles that happen in Yetziat Mitzrayim, God turned the entire world upside down. to send miracles. He turned the water into blood. He sent frogs. He sent lice. He made darkness that was so thick you couldn't move. Says the Meshech Chochmah, you see that God was willing to change the universe, to send a message that will only result in 2 people getting the message. Which means God can speak to thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of people, and his expectation is worthwhile if only 2 people are going to benefit that message or understand the realities of that message. Which means it's a very strong statement to say that if God is speaking, he doesn't have an expectation for those people who don't know that they're supposed to be hearing. A person who grows up completely ignorant of Torah and mitzvot, what do we expect from such a person? He didn't go to the schools. He didn't understand what he's supposed to be teaching. If anything, he was taught kfirah. You think God is now going to expect as much from this person?
I don't think this was God's intent, because his intent was that the result will be that everybody will go into Israel, but because XYZ they did in the desert, he decided to change the plan and then say, but so I'm not.
That's a good point.
This plan was only for
You're right. That's a very good, I would say like this. That's correct. So I have to look into the question according to what the Meshech Chochmah is explaining. However, what you do see is that even in the desert, there were many, many miracles that took place in the desert, right? We see the Ananei Kavod. We see that their clothing didn't change. The clothing grew with them. Food was available. Water was flowing with them as they traveled. There were many miracles that were still taking place that changed the nature of the world. And that's even after they did the sin, right? So we see that God is willing to change the nature of the world to be able to communicate a level of spirituality even to a smaller group. Now what does that mean? Does that mean, chas v'shalom, that I didn't read you the end of the Gemara. So the Gemara says, just like the leaving of Mitzrayim was a small number of a few, just like going into Israel was a small number from the few, so too was leaving of Mitzrayim was only a small number from a few. Says Rava at the end of that Gemara, Amar Rava, says Rava, V'chen liyemot HaMashiach. The same will apply before the coming of Mashiach. Which means that before the coming of Mashiach, Hashem is going to change the world in a way that it will be worthwhile even if only a few people will hear the message of Hashem. So does that mean that only the few people sitting around growing, understanding Torah and mitzvot, growing in their Judaism, listening, trying to become better Jews, are the ones that are going to be worthy to come to Mashiach? Does that mean that all of those other Jews that don't know any better, don't hear the message, don't change, are not going to be worthy of going in for Yemot HaMashiach? Very scary proposition. So I want to tell you. So he quotes the Gemara a little bit earlier, which gives a yishuv. It gives a little menuchat hanefesh to the situation. And now listen to what the Gemara says. The Gemara says a little bit earlier. It says, where is the pasuk? So he says like this. The Gemara quotes the following pasuk just a little bit before this Gemara. Now listen to this Gemara. The Gemara says, Ki anochi ba'aloti bachem v'lakachti etchem. It's talking about Yemot HaMashiach. Says Yirmiyah HaNavi, when I want to redeem you, says the pasuk, I will take you echad me'ir, one from every city, v'shnai mimishpacha, and 2 from a family will be redeemed. Amar Resh Lakish, says Resh Lakish, what is the explanation of this pasuk? Dvarim kiktavan. You have to take the pasuk very literally. Meaning to say, literally speaking, comes at the time of Mashiach, not everyone is going to be worthy of getting redeemed. It's going to be 1 from a city and 2 from a family. Says Rabbi Yochanan, the saving opinion here. Says Rabbi Yochanan, Lo nichalei lemarayu de'amrit lahu. It's not befitting of you to say that God would ever do such a thing. Could you say that God would do such a thing, that in the end of time, 1 from an entire city is going to be worthy of coming to Yemot HaMashiach? So he says, no, that is not the explanation of the pasuk. And this is how we explain the pasuk. Says the pasuk, Lo nichalima ela. Rather, the meaning is, Echad me'ir. 1 person from every city, mizakeh kol ha'ir kula. 1 person from every city can give a zechut on behalf of the entire city and save the whole city. And it's possible for two within one family, mizakin kol mishpacha kula, that those two can give a zachut, and then in their merit they can save the entire family and the entire city. Meaning to say, and this is the explanation of what's going on. Yes, when God sends the messages, He sends the messages to people who know that they're hearing. You can't speak to a person you can't speak Chinese to a person who never learned the language of Chinese and then have a complaint against him. Why didn't you listen? Again, we have no question, we can't judge a person who grew up in different ways. Yes, some people know more and they will be held more responsible. But if we talk about specific signs, yes, God has an expectation to those who will listen. Just like in Mitzrayim, just like in the desert, He changed the world even though it was only for a few to hear. But says the Gemara, those few who do hear the message and do change and step up to affect their life, he says they have the ability to influence and save everybody around them. That is the first power that we have. The power we have as people who live according to the values of Torah and mitzvot is that we have the ability, when we hear this message and we take it on ourselves to make our own life better. I want to become a better a better husband. I want to be better in my family. I want to do more chesed. I want to be more involved in tefillah, in Torah study. Says the Gemara, when we as individuals do it, we, as if we're taking on a piggyback, hundreds and thousands of other Jewish people who don't know any better, who are not exposed. Says the Gemara, everyone on this table has the ability to save an entire city, to be mizakeh them to come to Yonatan Moshiach. That it is an amazing idea, but it's also a tremendous responsibility. Because now we have to think in our minds, when we are weak, when we are lazy, when we make those mistakes, it's not affecting just me. I am affecting hundreds of people that didn't have the ability to do this themselves. They were waiting for me to give the zechut, and when we don't do that, chas v'shalom, it's a huge responsibility on our shoulders. So that's the first point I want to bring, is that, yes, Hashem does have an expectation at the time before Yonatan Mashiach, but He wants those who know to pick up the zechut on behalf of a lot of people who do not know. That is the amazing power. And that's how we don't have to ask the question, well, what's the point? I try to be machzik Shabbat, right? I'm trying not to drive on Shabbat. I try not to do all of the other things or work on Shabbat. But I know 50, 20, 30 other of my friends, they don't care. They don't know any better. They're going to do all of their work anyway. So what's the point? The point is, yes, you can make the difference. You can change what you do, and it will affect everybody, even though they on their level can make their own changes. That's the answer to the first question. The second question that we asked is, how do we influence the majority? How does the small influence the majority when we know that it's always the opposite way around? And I'm going to explain it to you with one of the most amazing ideas that I've seen in a sefer. It says like this, amazing idea. We know that when the Jews left and they had Yetziat Mitzrayim, they went to Har Sinai, they went to Mount Sinai to receive the Torah. Moshe Rabbeinu stands and all of the Jewish people witness Borei Olam, Hashem speaking to the Jewish people. He gives the Luchot, and then Moshe Rabbeinu goes up for another 40 days to receive the full understanding of what the Torah is. They make a miscalculation. Moshe Rabbeinu does not show up on time. There's a mass hysteria in the people. What do you find happens? All of a sudden, next thing you find is that the Jewish people build an egel, they build a golden calf, and they start worshiping an idol at the moment when they were the closest to revelation of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. It's the most grievous of desecrations that could ever happen. It's like at the moment of marriage, a person goes and takes another wife. Could you imagine how devastating that would be? And who are we talking about? We're talking about the Jewish people who had grown to the highest level of spirituality, that they had, each one of them had nevuah. How did they come to do this disgraceful act? You know what the Torah says? it says that the Jewish people did not initiate this on their own. There was a small group called the Erev Rav. Who was the Erev Rav? The Erev Rav were Egyptians. They saw the miracles that were happening for the Jews. They got excited. They said, well, if we stay here, we're done. Let's join with these guys. We got it. You hang out, we stick around with the Jews. Shalom al Yisrael, we're going to have it good. So what do? A whole small community of Erev Rav joins the Jewish people. But they were a small group. They were not at all as close in numbers to what we talk about the Jewish people at the time, which was maybe around 6 million. So there's a small group of people. Yet the Chachamim explain, and the Torah alludes to this, is that when Moshe Rabbeinu didn't come down, the Erev Rav stepped up and they convinced all of the Jewish people to commit Avodah Zarah. They're the ones that influence the rest of the people to sin. How does that happen? We know the laws of social psychology. The minority cannot influence the majority. The majority were strong. Yoreh Shamayim. They were prophets. You see this small group of people wanting to get everybody to sin. You think they're going to be able to influence the masses? It doesn't make sense. It's not possible according to the way we understand the world. So what's the explanation? Listen to the answer because it's amazing insight into human nature. Says Rav Ba'aran, he says, in his book called HaChaver V'Hashpa'ato, he says that yes, although the majority will almost always influence the minority, there are specific circumstances where even the minority can influence much larger masses of people. He says, you know when? He says, when there's chaos. When there's chaos, when there's uncertainty, when people are in a frenzy, then nobody's looking for where everybody's going. People pick up their eyes and their ears and they listen to who's talking the loudest. Whoever has the loudest voice at a time of uncertainty and chaos, they will be able to influence many more people than they would normally be able to. This is, by the way, what we see is happening in Europe. In the Middle Eastern countries, what's happening? There's chaos. The governments are falling apart. So what do? We have these extremist movements getting up. They're very loud, but they're very small. In comparison to the size of the communities and countries that they're taking over, they're nobody. But what do? There's chaos. People don't know what to do. They listen. The loud voice will immediately influence the movement.
It's the case of Hitler.
That's right. Hitler, Yamach Shemo. The same thing in Germany. The Germans were in the worst economic state they'd ever been. They wanted to hear a voice, even though you have to think the Nazi Party was such an extreme movement. If you study the history of the time, it's crazy that they were able to even be walking in the streets. But what do we find? There was a moment of chaos, then a voice is heard. You know, it reminds me of a story that happened to a relative of mine when he was leaving Iran. Right after the Shah was overturned. It's a very difficult and very bad situation. But it was immediately at that moment where they were trying to leave Iran. So what did they do? As everyone they were trying to go out of Iran through Turkey, get visas in Turkey, and then try to get somewhere else that's a little bit more safe, specifically for Jewish people. So they go to the airport. It tells the story very vividly. They go to the airport, and there's lineups of cars. They leave the car on the side, and they just run into the airport. They say, let's get out of here. Walk into the airport. What does he see? Complete disaster. People are running in every direction, screaming, yelling. Complete chaos. He looks around. He says, how are we ever going to get anywhere in this airport? It's a disaster. So he looks around and he sees that when there's chaos, there's an opportunity. So what did he do? He takes a box. He goes to the front of the room. He stands on the box. He fixes his suit and his tie. And he starts looking at the crowd and says, you, go in this line. You, back over there. You do this, you do that. All of a sudden people are, somebody's talking, giving direction. All of a sudden everybody starts falling into place. He looks at the lady at the ticket counter and he says, you, print 5 tickets for this family. Yes, sir. She prints the tickets. He takes the tickets for the family. They get on the airplane and they leave the country. This is I wanted to bring the example because I believe at a time and place that we live today, when we ask, how can we How can we influence the world? How can we, as such a small number, how can we influence many large numbers? It's very simple. The world is in a state of chaos right now. True. People don't have direction. People don't have answers. How do I bring up my family? How do I talk to my kids? Do I say this? Do I say that? Do I confront this? Do I do that? What kind of job should I take? What should be my Torah study? Everybody is confused. Nobody has any direction. And the more information we have, we think we have the internet, everything is available, the more confused everybody is, right? My wife has this habit, which I hate. Whenever one of my kids has a symptom of something, she's like, oh no, let me find out what it is. She goes online and she Googles the symptoms. What do you think she's going to find? 10,000 different things. She's like, oh my God, what's wrong with my kids? Right? More information makes the world more confused.
But I think there is one contradiction with what you're saying. You're saying that the law says that the majority influence the minority, right? But you just said that minority cannot influence the majority unless there is a chaos, correct? But before you just said that we, 2 of us, or 20 of us, can influence 5,000 people from the community, right? Not driving on Shabbat.
Not influence,
Not
safe.
influence.
Show them the road, whatever,
Yes.
you name it.
Yes.
It's a contradiction.
No, so I think you hit the point exactly that I'm trying to make. When do we say that a minority cannot influence the majority? That's when the majority is strong, when the majority understands its way, when it's committed, and it's very hard to break into that, because the minority voice will be muted. But I don't believe in our day and age we have what we call any longer majority. In our society, in our world, there's no longer a majority because everybody's going in every different direction. And when everyone's going in different directions, I believe it's like the state of chaos like we had in the airport with my uncle, like they had by Har Sinai. How did the masses, how did they get influenced by 1-2 small group of people that had a strong message? Because when there's uncertainty and unclarity, then the individual has a power to influence. And I believe if we take that responsibility in ourselves and we live al pi Torah and mitzvot in our life, we don't have to go and start putting in a shofar, trying to get everyone. No, in our day and age, when you walk as a Jew, when you don't do business because you say this is not according to my Torah, when you are in a certain meeting and they say, well, let's go eat here, says, no, I can't, this is not kosher for my religion. When we live the values that give clear direction and what's true and what's not, we have the ability to influence a lot more people around us than we ever would have had before. I believe now, as individuals, we have more power to influence the world than we ever have had in our life. Look, I don't usually record the shiurim. I don't. It's a weird thing for me putting a camera. I see myself in a small thing, and then afterwards I look at it and I'm like, wow, I look so fat. It's funny, but I posted one of these classes on a website, with Torch, and all of a sudden, a few weeks later, I see 200, 300, 400 people clicking on the shiur and listening to the class. I said, Hashem Yerachem, how could it be ever a time where I could be sitting in a room with 2, 3, 4 people, but I'm talking to 500, 600 people? Because people want direction. People want to know what is the movement. And we have the answers with our Torah. We have the answers with our Misorah, and the Chachamim have always told us to do. I just want to end, it makes it a little bit easier, specifically in America. In America, I think our ability to influence is even stronger than other places in the world. I tell you, in the last month itself, I had 2 situations. One situation, I was at the doctor's office, and I'm walking into the doctor's office. The nurse walks over to me and she looks at me, she says, "Such a pleasure to meet you." It's a nice doctor's office, but I never had the nurse coming and saying, like, so happy, greeting me. Usually they take your chart, let alone look at you. Taking your she's looking at me, she's smiling. I'm like, wow, did I put my new suit on today? I don't know why all of a sudden. So I'm sitting in the room, she looks at me, she says, I love Jewish people. she wasn't Jewish, clearly didn't look Jewish or anything. She says, I love Jewish people. She says, I go to Israel. I love the spirituality. She says, I even did a DNA test, and I found that I have Jewish blood in me somewhere from my history. And she's telling me about her friends that they're Jewish, and she has to always tell them what to do Kippur. I'm like, wow, imagine we've come to a time and place in our history that people are taking DNA tests to show that they're connected to the Jews. There's another, I'll tell you 3 things that just happened in the last month. Same situation. The second situation, my cousin works in the city in Manhattan. He works in the tech business. So he's sitting and he meets with a young woman, and she sees that my cousin is a Torah observant Jewish boy, and she says, I just found out that I'm Jewish. So he says, wow, that's amazing. She says, yeah, it's an amazing thing. I don't know anything about it. I never grew up with it. I didn't even know. I literally just found out. So he says, call my cousin. She says, call my cousin John. He'll know what to tell you. So I don't know what the expectation is. So I get this phone call from this woman, and she's like, yes, it's an amazing thing. I just found out that I'm Jewish. And I said, wow, it's an amazing thing. It's like you found a treasure in your backyard, what you're about to find. And I said, well, tell me, how did you find out you're Jewish? Did you talk to her mother and she told you? She says, no, my mother didn't even know that she was Jewish. I said, and then she says, even my grandmother didn't know that she's Jewish. So here I'm like, oh man, what's going on? She says her mother doesn't know she's Jewish. Her grandmother didn't know she's Jewish. They're from Romania. And it's possible that in Romania, the Jews, it was communist. So many Jews didn't want to even tell their families. But 3 generations not to even know, that was a little strange. So I looked at her, I said, so how do you know you're Jewish? So she says, it's amazing. I took a DNA test. That's what she says. And she says that in my DNA test, I found that the chromosome, which is connected on the mother's side, on the paternal side, is a genetic continuity that we find amongst Ashkenazi Jewish people. So she says, wow, look I'm Jewish through my mother. It's amazing. Now, I don't know if according to halakha, that's acceptable, right? We have very, very different standards. But you see that there's a movement. And the third thing I saw, I read this article about, they're trying to reduce anti-Semitism in the world. So somebody had a very interesting idea. You can decide whether you think it's a good idea or not. But there's a group of people that what they're doing is that they're giving everybody free or DNA tests. Why are they doing this? Because they want to show the majority of the world that they have Jewish blood in them. Because if you think about it, it's true. If you take the Jewish people from when we started close in history to the same time as the Chinese. Imagine. The Chinese people were small people, the Jews were small people. Imagine you go that far back in history. Fast forward couple thousand years, how many Chinese exist in the world today? 2 billion? 2 billion Chinese? How many Jews? 2 billion Jews? No. What do we have? 12 million? 13 million? It makes no sense. What happened? If you have a people that started so long ago, then today we should be billions. It's just not logical. What's the answer? The answer is yes. Billions of Jews exist, but they're not Jewish. Why? Because we have very specific laws on what is considered within the fold of Judaism. It has to be specific through the mother's side. Unfortunately, a lot of Jewish people were also killed out throughout the generations, but a lot of it was assimilation. So what they have is, yes, if you look in the DNA, you can find countries that have hundreds and thousands of people that are not Jewish at all, but they have in their DNA connection to Jews. So they're trying to use this as like a public relations movement to say, why are you causing so much trouble for these Jews? You all have a little bit of them inside of you. It's just a very funny thing. But what I'm trying to say is you see that it's becoming popular to be a Jew. In America specifically. In Europe it's a little bit different. And the proof I wanted to bring to here, I didn't have and I forgot to bring it with you. But it's an amazing thing that I found. Amazing thing that it proves exactly my point. That it's cool to be Jewish. Never has it been like this. It used to be, in Europe it doesn't exist right now, right? If you're in Europe, You're ever traveling, you want to eat kosher food, right? So you can't pick up the product and look for the hashgacha, the kosher symbol. There's no kosher symbols in Europe, right? You go to London, I think now maybe they have one, but you don't have any kosher symbols. The way people know what's kosher is that they have a little book with all the products that are kosher. Why don't they put it on the label itself? Because it's not popular. They don't want to, they don't want to cause their products to be, not bought because they have kosher sign on it. Because it's I'm sure that maybe there's other reasons too. In America, 5-10 years ago, maybe 15 years ago, when you wanted to buy something, right? It used to be very hard to find the kosher symbol. Remember, it was like a microscopic size. You had to search on it. Oh, there it is. It's like in the middle of the writing. They put it. They find it in there. This is 5-10 years ago. Now, I see this everywhere now. When you pick up products, aside from the fact that now 70%, 50%, 60% of all the products in the supermarket are kosher, they don't hide the kosher symbol. You know where they put the kosher symbol? They put it on the advertisement. I'm telling you, I see this. I was just in Canada. I wanted to prove this point to a group of people. So I went into the cupboard. I took a product out. It was tea bags. On the advertisement of the tea bag, what did it say? It says recycled material, part of the forestry initiative. What else did it say? It said there was a Canadian flag, like made in Canada, pride. Right after the Canadian flag, in the same advertisement, was a big kosher symbol. Because they're trying to sell it now. You see on potato chips bags, you look for it. You see it says gluten-free, this free, and kosher. It's right in the advertisement because it's cool. They're like, oh, this is also kosher? Put it in the label. Let's market it. That says something because marketing is a multi-billion-dollar business. They wouldn't put it on the advertisement if they didn't believe that it's popular. So ladies and gentlemen, well, there's no ladies here, but gentlemen and ladies who are watching, we have an opportunity now to influence the world for 3 reasons. 1, because God says, even though a lot of people don't know and they don't hear, Echad me'ir mizakeh kol ha'ir. One person living according to what the Torah and what Hashem wants from us, he can make a zechut for everybody around him. 2, yes, normally the majority influences the minority, except for moments of uncertainty and chaos. We live in a time where people don't have direction. When we stand up and we live our lives strong and we're very committed to our life, people are influenced by that. And 3, it's even more now in our society, in today, the way the world is that it's become popular because when people do things that are a little bit, I would have never believed that the most successful fundraiser, I think ever in the history, was this ice bucket thing. Think about it, it's the craziest. Imagine I told you a year ago that I'm going to get hundreds of thousands of people to pour a bucket of ice on them, and not only that, they're going to volunteer and pay. You think, oh, the world is insane. But what happened? It became popular because it's different. It's strange. If you would have told me a few years ago that there's going to be a Shabbat Parashat Noach this week, that millions of unaffiliated Jewish people around the world are going to sign to keep one Shabbat. They're going to say, okay, no lights, no Shabbat, no cars, no cigarettes. You think it's crazy stuff. This doesn't happen. This is not our world. Nobody cares. But they do. Because when we do things that are different, that go against what everybody else is doing, when we give a message which is stronger, yes, we can do these things. The world can change in the right way when we step up and we are the voice that people are listening to. People just want to hear some truth. And when they hear this truth, and it can come from all of us, each one of us in this room has the ability to be an influencer for the greater good of the world. So B'ezrat Hashem, we should be zocheh, we should hear the message, we should listen to the message, we should act on the message, and that message should be a zechut for all of the people around us, and B'ezrat Hashem, it should be a message that influences all the people around us, and we should be zochet to have Moshiach, B'ezrat Hashem, very soon in our time. Thank you for listening. Yeah, Rabbi Chananya ben Akasha Omer.